Hey guys, good afternoon. This is Mike McCormick with Advanced Criminology here in Owings Mills. Today is January 25th, 2018. Time is approximately 2:10 p.m. in the afternoon. I'm coming to you today to discuss and comment in reference to the recent news reports of the officer that was indicted in reference to the evidence planning. Let's see. His name, according to the documents here, is Richard A. Pinheiro with the Baltimore Police Department. Looks like he's been a member here about 6 years. I'm going to title this video Body Cam Sham Officer Indicted. So let's get started in this case. I want to talk about this because I was following this case last year when it first crept up into the news about the body-worn camera policy, and that would be policy number 824 of the Baltimore City Police Department that was updated 13th of September 2017. And in that that's a long policy. Looks like it's about 13 or 14 pages long. It discusses and it gives the officers clear guidance on how to handle the body-worn cameras from the beginning to end. But what's been reported in the news media is that, and this is from the spokesperson from the police department, is that the body camera is to never be turned on. To be turned on, but never off until officers are completed their investigation. Now, on its face, that's correct. However, there are several exceptions that are also included in this particular policy, number 824, that gives the officer the discretion to turn it off, but it itemizes the different ways and reasons why an officer can turn off a body-worn camera. The other issue is this. This officer has been charged with evidence tampering, fabricating evidence in the case, and he's been charged departmentally with probably a few misconduct charges as well. We'll have to face internal investigation. That's why he's been suspended right now currently. Now, Marilyn Mosby, who came on TV yesterday, and she announced that that there was going to be pretty much a no tolerance policy with the officers in using this particular piece of equipment in terms of when an officer can turn the body camera on and off, and adhering to the policy, and that there was not going to be any type of discrimination in who they would prosecute in reference to violating this departmental policy. And if you didn't know, the reason that the policy is in effect is because it deals with Fourth Amendment, Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights of individuals if they're going to be charged with a crime in terms of evidence. Evidence recovered, on view, search and seizure, all that stuff is covered in the Constitution. So that's why Marilyn Mosby would get involved, because if you plant some evidence on someone or you recover evidence legally, it has to be done according to the Constitution and how it's supposed to be done. And so she has to be the person, according to the quote-unquote gatekeeper, to ensure that the officers are certainly going to follow the Constitution while they're enforcing law in the city of Baltimore. So I'm all for that. You know how I am. I'm also for oversight when it comes to police officers and how they do their duty, particularly when it pertains to misconduct. If anyone knows me and has been following Advanced Criminology, you will know that I talk about officer misconduct cases all the time, and I talk about accountability not only at the officer level, but also at the supervisor level. This is one of the problems, though, I have in this particular case. Even though Marilyn Mosby made the statement that they will certainly go after those folks who violate the rules, particularly this rule here, was that if you go back, and I'm going to put a link down in the discussion box. When you go back, and I want you to click on the link and review the videotape, you will see that there are two other officers involved in this case that we don't even hear their names. Now, I know who they are, because I go back and I review reports that have been submitted to the police department that have been written by officers. So I always know who's with an officer on the scene in terms of an officer who was a backup, maybe officer who was riding with an officer, maybe 2 or 3 riding together. And then you have officers who kind of divvy up responsibilities after they make an arrest. Maybe one officer will do the paperwork, one officer will transport a suspect to central booking. Then you might have one officer who's going to submit evidence. Okay? So you have 2 other additional officers in this case. And again, I know who they are. I have their names. The problem I have is that if these officers stood by, and according to the public defender's office who reviewed these tapes last year, she made mention that she heard officers laughing in this particular case. So it is a situation here where officers don't even take their job serious in terms of evidence finding, in terms of wrongdoing, which was going on, and they all were there. And in my eyesight, they're all culpable of assisting this officer in planting false evidence. And so what I don't get is, although we hear about the one officer who was indicted, you had 2 other officers that were there from the beginning to the end. And we don't hear anything about what happened to these 2 officers. And so that's a concern for me because, you know, we got to keep going back to the Department of Justice report about how lax the police department was in pursuing discipline for officers. And so you're just as guilty as Officer Pinheiro is actually fabricating the evidence by standing there laughing about it, that you thought it was funny that he was doing that. That the possibility of somebody going to jail for a long time was actually that hilarious is unbelievable to me. And I take it serious that these officers find it to be so amusing that an officer could construct evidence and file legal paperwork to have somebody prosecuted for this. And so, you know, we've got to take this thing a little more serious over there on Fayette Street because it's not being taken serious if you're just only going to slap the other 2 officers on the hand and prosecute one. So, you know, that's just my position on that. And I would certainly like to hear from Ms. Mosby, or the police commissioner, in reference to my statement, because I don't really see it as being fair. It's not fair in terms of justice. And certainly it's not fair to the citizens of Baltimore, and it sends a mixed messages to the folks who work in uniform, that some guys will be prosecuted and sent home, and some people won't. And that's exactly what it appears to be. So I had a couple questions, and one question was that why didn't the other 2 officers who were there, and if you go back and review the film, the short clip, you will see they had body cameras too. So when I read the policy is still unclear to me because if you have 3 officers in the car or 4 officers in the car and they both all roll up to the scene at one time to investigate crime, who's responsible for turning on their video camera, the body cam? Is it all the officers or is it one officer? You know, and so it doesn't specify in 824 in the 13 pages that I read, and you know I read stuff front and back, and I don't see anything pertaining to that. So that was just one of the questions I had. The other question I had was that there are people who have their names on documentation in this case. And I want to know if their names are on documentation in this case, what level of responsibility do they assume in this particular incident? And then also the last one would be is internal investigation, internal affairs pursuing the other officers who were involved. And let me tell you why this is important. Every time that we get a case where we have officers misconduct, where more than one officer is either present or involved, the problem is it seems to be, again, where you have some of these specialized units where the rules are kind of either not understood, not followed, or unclear. And if this policy has been out since September, and this is really an update, so the policy was out before then. The policy was instituted when they got these body cams. It would seem to me that the officers should either read this policy, supervisors should go over this policy at roll call, so that it's clear as to when to use and not to use this body cam. Because you got officers out here getting in trouble behind it. And there's more cases to come, trust me, behind this whole body cam issue. And he seems to be not the clarity is just that it's not so clear to me when I read it in certain aspects of it. And then when you allow for certain provisions where you can turn the body camera off, you know, you kind of lead. It just makes for a lot of confusion, in my estimation. So, you know, that's just the point I wanted to bring up. Now, the other thing I wanted for you guys to understand is that whenever I look at one or two officers in the department that are doing things and we get wind that they're, you know, up to no good or whatever the case may be and violating departmental policy, I look at the arrest reports and I look at the continuum of officers who work together over a period of a year or two, and I start to see a pattern form. And that pattern is that these officers and the other two who I'm not naming generally are partnered up with Officer Pinero. And if you start going back to look at their cases, these guys are on a lot of cases, a whole bunch of cases in the city. Once again, bad conduct is not isolated to one incident. Bad conduct is generally a course of conduct over a period of time. And so I would hope that someone in the police department decides to go back and look at some of these cases that these officers were involved in to find out what is going on. Do we have other cases out there where before the body cameras were even instituted that these officers all worked on? Do we know if other evidence has been planted? The only reason we know that evidence was planted in this case is because a stupid officer left the body camera on and off, turn it on and off. You know, he did that to himself. So, you know, it's important that we find these things out. This is what criminal justice is all about. And for the department to get a hold of this thing before this thing continues to spiral out of control with officer misconduct and officer accountability. So that's all I want to talk about in this particular video, so I kept it short. There are going to be some other things I'm going to be talking about over the weekend. And so with that, my name is Mike McCormick. You give me your thoughts. Certainly I want you new folks who are new to the channel to subscribe today if you can. And we'll be putting out some stuff very shortly. Once again, as always, guys, leave your comments so we can discuss things. Thank you very much.